Hello again, everyone. You're joining us for another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint podcast series. My name is Jeff Mix. I'm head of content and research. I'm joined today by the AlixPartners team. We're going to be having a conversation about what some manufacturers should be doing during a time of turbulence, some of the quick wins and low-hanging fruits and success stories they can still find when otherwise they're facing disruptions. It's going to be a wide-ranging conversation that I've been looking forward to for a while. First of all, let me say thank you so much for joining me, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
It is a big group. Maybe we could sort of start at one end and just introduce ourselves to the camera.
Sure. So I'm Alan Merriman. I'm a partner in our supply chain and operations practice. And like my colleagues here, we focus on manufacturing improvements in particular, but all sorts of end-to-end supply chain.
Hi, everyone. Anna Horton. I am part of our manufacturing operations performance improvement practice at AlixPartners. Prior to joining consulting, I had about 10 years in industry. Someone said it in the conference earlier this week that working from process engineer to plant manager. So seeing all that within the four walls of a factory and have a big passion for manufacturing.
My name is Sudeep Saxena. I am a partner in our supply chain and operations practice as well, and also focus on manufacturing, mostly four walls and network optimization. And as with most of us in the firm, we are all operators before we became consultants. So we have the actual industry experience prior to coming here.
Hi, I'm Bhavik Mistry. I'm a director in our supply chain and operations practice. I work in the area of manufacturing primarily, as well as supply chain, and I'm happy to be here.
Great. Well, so I want to give a little context before we get into things, because I think this is going to be a wide-ranging conversation around maybe something that every manufacturing executive is facing at the moment, but a few of them are actually a little nervous to talk about, which is that there is a lot of disruption happening right now. I mean, there's been disruption since COVID, but and that kind of disruption we've been talking about a lot, but lately it feels like the timing of disruption is coming faster. There is more uncertainty in the market that you feel you can't make long-term plans, and yet these are still leaders who are being asked to improve performance and move the ball forward in their organizations. And I think maybe this could be a conversation that actually offers some quick wins, some hope, some things that they can be doing right now that, maybe you can't set a 1 or 2 year strategy, but you could be working on a 90-day project that is actually going to have impact. And so first of all, I want to thank you for suggesting we have this conversation, because I think a lot of people want to hear it. Maybe we can start off with the idea of, what are improvements someone can do just in their facility, some easy wins within the four walls of their building that is going to help them. They are making productive choices, maybe not in the big strategic picture, but at the tactical level, that they can say, yes, I am still improving my business, I'm still helping the organization grow. And who would like to maybe get started with that?
I'll dive in a little bit to start, and I think it's really, when we talk about four walls improvement in the time of disruption, it's control the controllable. You can do the basic things within your site to make sure that while all the costs around the rest of the world might be impacting your facility, what you can do inside and make sure you have a good OEE, a good manufacturing operating system, control the amount of waste that's coming in and out of your facility. That's what you can control today, tomorrow, next week, regardless of what might be happening in the world and how that might be impacting you.
And just to expand on that a little bit more, the opportunities to get those fundamentals in place, right? Am I doing the right fundamental things so that I can handle the disruption? Mm-hmm. So whatever my other opportunities are that come up, I've got the basics in place. I'm managing it well, and I can get it into control. So then I can expand what I'm doing.
Having the day-to-day details locked in gives you confidence that you can pivot when you need to pivot.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think one of the important things that plants do, and they should focus on even more right now, is the daily management system. So daily management system, just in a nutshell, allows you to have the right level of information, reaching the right level of people in the organization hierarchy in the plant at the right frequency. So it enables two things, right? Right now, there's a lot of volatility, demands and priorities are changing. So from a bottom-up point of view, it allows the issues to be escalated at the right time to the right level so that they are resolved promptly. And from a top-down perspective, if you're changing demands, if you're changing priorities on the lines, it enables the management to ensure that the people know it at the right time and can start acting accordingly. So that's in a nutshell. We typically help companies implement such daily management systems, starting with meetings at the shift level, meeting at a daily level in the plant, meeting at a weekly level and then monthly level with senior executives. That way, the right level of KPIs and data is looked at each level, and this strategic decisions are made accordingly.
It's a great idea.
Anything that you'd like to add?
It's just controlling the controllable, but creating a culture that embodies that and is able to quickly pick on what is out of control.
Yeah.
I think as well, one of the key parts about the daily management system is you want to work it as much as it's there to be, especially in a time of disruption. We've seen many clients where, okay, something new came down the pipeline, something changed, we're not getting a material, and then they have a separate meeting. The whole point of the daily management system is that you work it through your system and your meeting, and it works for you. And so being very disciplined about not having the ad hoc meetings, the things that are separate, the more you work these systems, the more effective and improved you can be, especially with those changing priorities. It's always mapped against the same thing.
Yeah, there are a few things I'd like to add. Daily management is not just limited to production in the plant, it's cross-functional. You need to address quality issues, safety issues, HR issues, some important announcements, line staffing changes, recognition of people, boosting the morale. So these things are also very important. And we've seen some of our clients having these systems in place but not using them effectively. So the major drawbacks that we've seen is daily management system being used for just management reporting. Like it's just passing the information to the top saying that everything's going well and everyone's happy. That's not an effective use of daily management. It's not like we shouldn't be spending a lot of time reporting on the past. We should be focusing more on making today's shift successful, the entire day successful, the week successful, and the month successful. That's the objective of daily management.
I want to bring it back into the context of, we're looking at cost reduction and management essentially in a state of disruption. So picking on, basically this daily management is just building the right backbone for the company to say, okay, if there's anything that is out of ordinary, everyone can spot it, can reduce the cost or just flag it, right? So now you're looking at a whole company from top to bottom, being able to point the issue and then collectively resolve it before it becomes a bigger problem.
And when we think about why this is important, right, in this context, the disruption that we're talking about, and now the past few weeks, tariffs, right, onshoring was an issue. Now it's a bigger issue. And so what we've been thinking about is what are these things you can do to enable you to onshore production more quickly, avoid tariffs, whatever it might be, right? We're not going to get into tariffs because none of us know what's going to happen with that.
By the time this episode publishes, things may have changed.
Exactly. Exactly. So the reason we're talking about these things as being important, talking to our clients about, is that if you get your fundamentals right and you can operate your plants more productively, you can get more product out the door, you can bring some of that production on shore where you've got the capabilities, right? So this is part of the way of dealing with the disruption. I don't have to take the time to invest capital to do some massive network analysis, which you're going to need to do anyway, but I don't have to do that before I can act, right? I can start bringing things on today where I've got the capacity, the capability to do it.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to enable fundamentally.
And it's not only about cost. Cost is certainly the biggest driver, but it's about agility and responding in a fast, timely manner to your customers, to your clients. So it's about the turnaround time and making sure, again, this operating system, being able to control your entire plant and everything that goes along inside of it. If you are good at it, you will eventually be able to serve your customer faster. And then, again, now you're comparing to the longer supply chains instead of, them being served from further away. Now you're onshore. You're able to then control how quickly you can react to your customers' demands and in a way kind of create a differentiation.
Well, maybe we can even talk about it from the idea of finding something positive to think about. So if you don't have long-term certainty, if you're not putting part of your managerial energies into a long-term strategy, you can work on those fundamentals that are good. And maybe we can use as an example, say, material handling, which is something that is always important, but when is it ever I'm going to set time aside and improve my material handling strategy? There is an opportunity here while we figure out our onshoring strategy, while we figure out where we're going to be on tariffs. We can look at the day-to-day of, what are we doing in materials handling? When did we actually last review this stuff? What is new in the space? Are there opportunities to improve on something that is humble but important? And maybe we could talk about material handling as one example of the larger conversation. Who would want to get into that?
I think I'd look at it a little more broadly than just material handling, right? It's materials management, it's material usage, it's material conservation, it's scrap reduction, and Anna, maybe you want to build on that a little bit.
Absolutely, yeah. Material waste is probably one of the biggest losses in any manufacturing site. It's things you paid for that you don't end up getting paid for. It's things that leave the site not as part of your finished product. And especially when material costs could be changing based on where you source them from, you want to be really good stewards and minimize the waste as much as possible. Also, often with materials, it's tend to be measured on a variance basis. So as long as you haven't deviated from where you've historically been in your daily management system, you'd say you were all green. It's all fine. As long as you're not losing more or less than you have previously, you're good. Often when looking at material waste and usage, you want to take a step back, look holistically, look at specific materials, their use, their costs, and say, okay, what's standing out, not just from am I different from where I've been, but what's just bad? What could I improve? A great example we had from a former client that Alan and I worked with is they hadn't taken that step back. They'd say, well, our variances are good. We've been where we've been historically. Maybe we improve a couple pennies, a couple percents here and there. But then when we showed them some data and said, hey, look, this one flavor compared to all your flavors, this one you lose a little bit more and it's more expensive. Let's look at that flavor in particular. And looking at the data in a different way with the manufacturing team, with some of our client teams and the engineers, the people who really should see this day in and day out, they said, why is that one flavor different? And we ended up breaking for lunch, and it seemed like it was really bothering one of the superintendents or the process engineers, and he went down to the line and said, what is it about this one flavor? And he realized for this one in particular, it wasn't calibrated correctly, and he literally just turned the knob down and said, no longer a loss, no longer a thing. But none of that would have come up if you hadn't taken that step back and said, let's analyze this on a kind of granular basis to not just ask what's different, but what could be better.
And just to look at the magnitude of that one little simple thing, that was worth over $200,000 a year in material loss. Right. I mean, so that little action, they just put another $200,000 on the bottom line.
Amazing.
Little things, sometimes.
We call it a zero-based approach to material management or whatever you want to call it. Just like Anna said, material variances. People can bury or hide, I would say, inefficiencies in those variances. So the approach of zero-based really takes a look at what would be the art of the possible, what's the best that you can do, and then kind of go with that approach as opposed to just historical.
I think it's important to pay attention to control limits across all steps of the process in the manufacturing line, because sometimes the control limits are too wide and they were grandfathered in and no one's touched them for a long time, and you keep losing materials day in and day out, and no one knows what's the right standard, what's the center line for that control limit. And that would be an exercise that people could do easily across all their lines and see how they can reduce waste.
At the end of the day, the discussion we just had was about controlling material costs, essentially, and reducing that with scrap and everything else that's associated with it. Just controlling that helps, improve efficiencies, improve your cost, and at the end of the day, that's what's going to drive, easier deployment of the onshoring.
One more thing I'd like to add is looking at the inventory of materials and how aged and old it is, because a lot of times companies don't pay attention to that. They don't have accurate reports on inventory. They expire, they become obsolete, and then they just scrap them, which is a loss of millions of dollars in some cases. And now that tariffs are coming in, a lot of those materials have been sourced from abroad, and those need to be paid attention to.
So I think another opportunity when we're focusing on the fundamentals and our day-to-day is there are ongoing projects that we may have started a year ago that they fall by the wayside or they're not getting the attention they deserve, and maybe very top of mind for me would be like AI and machine learning, where everyone is very excited about this and there's probably a pilot project somewhere and there's probably someone who is very passionate about this. Maybe we can give them a little more attention, a little more bandwidth to do some things, and I wonder if that would even fit into some of the materials management we were just talking about as an example. But why don't we talk about AI and machine learning as one of these easy wins that you could just give a little more attention right now?
It's obviously a topic at the top of everybody's mind. I think the biggest challenge related to AI, machine learning, all of that is defining and identifying spots where you can actually do something productive with it, right? And making it very concrete. So to build on what Bhavik was talking about, especially around control limits and material controls, right? There are things you can do with AI right now that can help you get your processes under control. A recent example of a project that we did was, it was a very complex casting process, actually. But they had very good data. They had data on, I believe it was 27 different variables on this casting machine. And they had it for 200,000 units over a several month period, about a month period of time. And they also knew which of those units had passed or failed quality and for what reason. That's a lot of data. I mean, a 27 variable regression analysis is not something that you can do in a short period of time in the past. What we did was to apply a random forest model to all of that data. So 27 machine variables across 200,000 units across the pass-fail quality. And out of that analysis, the machine learning tool, the random forest tool, identified what it thought were the top 5 variables in the process on the machine that influenced the quality pass or fail. That's great, but you got to take that next step with it, right? And let's bring back the humans. So what we did was to take that data and what the model told us were the top 5 influencing variables, and ran it back with the mechanics, the engineers, the operators, right? The people that know how the machine runs. And they said, these top 4 make sense. We think number 6 is more important than number 5. Okay. So you got sort of the human reality check on it. But now what they were able to do was then to go look at their control limits. Say, okay, our first variable was this. It should be within this range. It's been within that range. And when it fails quality, it's within that range. Now we're going to run some tests on that variable, that setting, bring it back into where it's supposed to be and see what our output does, right? Quality improves a few %, you go on to the next variable. And so this was something that was accomplished in about a 4 to 5 week period. And they started seeing the benefits around week 6 or week 7 once they made that first adjustment. And it continues from there. So there are very specific applications of AI, and maybe somebody else wants to talk about something with respect either to scheduling, labor management.
But I do appreciate a specific use case like that, because I think a lot of manufacturers are thinking, I've got that kind of data on my process, so they can put themselves in that position. But scheduling, of course, is important too. I do want other use cases. I just wanted to compliment that one. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have something scheduling, but I will say something that we worked on recently on an overtime management. Something again in the interest of cost reduction, and how do you actually reduce anything that you can control. It was a lot of data also, again, and a lot of information. This was a data on clocking in and clocking out. So,
and everybody's got that data because they got to pay their people.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So everybody's got that. And what we realized was, anecdotally, we saw some, employees clock in sooner than they were supposed to, or clock out later than they were supposed to. And obviously with that comes some overtime that the company would pay them. And to be able to understand the value of it, and with the rolling shift pattern and things like that, it wasn't very clean to be able to just analyze that data and tell, who needs what type of, I guess, whether that's discipline or control or whatever that means, right? So we use this AI-generated tool that would then consolidate this information, fed some information in terms of what the shift pattern is, and with that, then we were able to find out where the anomalies are. We were able to actually find like a trend with between shifts or a certain type of a certain shift and a certain few people that would normally do that, and then address that those people directly, and then also then work with the company to put in a new policy that would reduce overtime.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think a big takeaway with these AI or machine learning implementations is it doesn't have to be everything. It doesn't have to be everything all at once. You don't have to have a fully digital factory to be able to use these technologies to your benefit in the near term. I think what we look to try to implement is these very practical, pointed solutions that solve a problem that drive value as quickly as possible. And while it's great to say let's put our entire system on a digital twin and optimize and do these things, a lot of times companies aren't prepared for that. They don't have the data integrated in the right way, or even the data networked in the right way to be able to drive those insights, which eventually we do want to get to. That is part of a long-term strategy for Industry 4.0. But where we see value and can implement these very specific pointed solutions, that tends to set companies on their path towards their future sooner than they maybe think they could do otherwise.
I know one of the areas that I talk about a lot with maybe the supply chain people a little more than the manufacturing people is the idea of sales and operational planning, working from a forecast. Obviously, the joke about forecasting is, they're great. They're always wrong. You can depend on that. And I think maybe that's an opportunity in this time of disruption where you can say, okay, manufacturers are given sales and operational planning data, and then they have to try to make the best of things during a time of disruption. I think there are probably some lessons we learned during COVID that can be applied, but I think there's also probably an AI element, a machine learning element that we didn't have 5 years ago and we do now. Maybe we can talk a little bit about sales and operational planning.
Absolutely. There's a very short-term piece to this, which is reducing your downtime due to changeovers, waiting for materials, things that you just lose the production time, right? The very short-term thing is, what's your finite scheduling look like? Do you have the right scheduling wheel in place? That you're doing things in the right sequence? Are you making the right quantities, right? What do I have the right minimum order quantity paired off against my inventory? These are things that you can manage now, that you can look at without a whole lot of extensive analysis and work. It's just how do I manage it day to day?
Yeah. And on top of that, it's how do you set up your customer? Each customer is not the same. Are we pricing with completely different area, which we'll tackle later? But are we suggesting the same delivery timelines or lead times to each set of customers? So everyone's gonna want your product within the next day, sure. But is it feasible? No. And so then you set up your limits, your inventory limits, then your service levels, and then according to the pricing that you give to the customer and the relative importance, both strategic as well as geographic.
I wonder if maybe we could expand upon the strategic piece of this. I appreciate we've been talking tactical for most of this, but I think there's actually something strategic about sales and operational planning.
There is. The thing about categorizing your customers and prioritizing the service levels to each of those is based on, again, where you want to grow and how do you want to where you want to improve. So the strategic aspect of it is essentially making sure you've got your A, your B, your C customers. You're defining your inventory levels based on those categories, and then really serving them and maximizing the value that you provide to them by hitting those levels. And if they do sway away from any of those lead times, right? If they're they demand a lead time that's shorter than what you promised them, then you price your product differently for that to be able to maximize your margins.
Yeah, the strategic word there is absolutely critical, right? Because it's got to be a strategy that's agreed on at the right level. Because what plants often find themselves in is the salesperson calling and saying, my customer really needs this tomorrow. Break into your schedule and make it for them. Right? If you've got the strategy, the plant can say, no, that's not a priority, and it's going to cost us in our total production. So having the strategy that allows you to execute the tactics, that allows everybody to act accordingly, is absolutely critical.
Another aspect of strategy is categorizing your products into made to order and made to stock, because that will determine how much inventory you keep. And when you think about made to stock, it's not just the finished products. Another thing that companies could do is they could look at the entire product category and see what are the similar processes that each product has. And up to that similar process, they could have a WIP product that's put on stock and then have the customization on top of it. That would help them ensure delivery levels without necessarily pressuring the plant.
Yeah, we call it a platform strategy. It's right between the middle, make the stock and make the order.
I wonder if maybe we could talk a little bit more about that from the context. And I know we have been avoiding talking about onshoring and tariffs and what have you, but there are some things that we used to make one way in one place for one market, sourcing from one place and one market, and that is changing. And maybe in this day-to-day conversation of the tactical level, we can talk about, are there some steps we can be taking to get ready to do it more locally, to do it with the sources that we've got, to do it for the market that we're still able to access? And I appreciate that's a broad question, but I think it probably lines up with what you were just talking about. Can someone expand upon it?
Sure. I'd say the first thing to take a look at really well is your overall supply chain and whether or not your strategy on make versus buy is actually well defined. We tend to keep doing what we do normally, and if a company's always been making things, they don't know whether or not they are comparatively competitive in the market. So just because you have the asset, can you actually make it at a lower cost than what the market can supply? So that's something that I think is the first thing to assess and reassess in your overall supply chain, whether that's a widget that you're making or whether that's just a sub part of the process. But do you have the core competency? Do you have the capability? And are you better off just buying it from elsewhere for a lower cost? I mean, those, while improving your capacity. I mean, those kinds of things kind of go into the equation and the decision. What we've often seen, and in fact are starting to see now, is a lot of the supply chain, especially coming from Asia. You have some manufacturing capabilities and even some vendors locally that can do that at a total landed cost that's about the same, if maybe slightly higher. But then the agility and being able to then source locally will obviously reduce your total landed cost in the long term when it comes to holding inventories, as well as the unknowns at this point in terms of what the tariff situation and the tariff costs would look like. So that whole make versus buy equation is changing at this point.
Anyone else want to add anything?
I would add, I think your product portfolio is key here. So like Sudeep mentioned, you're always making something for certain markets, but especially when you look at a time of disruption, you can be critical and evaluate, are the products we're making for certain customers close enough or comparable to products we'd make for other customers? And can we critically evaluate our portfolios, reduce our portfolios where needed, reduce the complexity where needed, and really drive value with a smaller group of core products that solve the problem, and ideally solve the problem at the least cost.
Actually, that's a great point about product complexity. And in fact, complexity clogs up your operation if you think about it, right? So what we've determined through our analysis, what we call CPP, which is customer and product profitability. And in that analysis, we understand what the true profitability of a product would be. And what we see generally is 20% of the products drive 80% of the profitability. The rest of the products, they basically drive complexity, right? So we were just talking about complexity and how that, there's a lot of cost that goes after serving that complexity on those products that are not profitable. So that's essentially being able to determine what that tail of products is, and then selectively, working with their customers to either Yeah, well, raise price so that way you can still be able to serve, or at least that cost to serve is baked into the margin. If it's not, selectively work on pricing or reducing that SKU base, if you would.
The one other point of that is the substitutability, right? If something I'm making specific for one customer is highly unprofitable or just not profitable, can I get them on something close, right? That is profitable for me, that's cheaper for them, or otherwise I'm going to go back to them and say, I need to raise the price so that I get paid for what I'm making.
Key takeaway with the disruption is riding the wave of disruption. And someone's mentioned earlier this week, never let a good crisis go to waste. So as we go into these, that helps with these hard conversations. If you've been serving a certain product to a certain customer for years and years, but this is the time to have those conversations and substitute them or make it work for you, rather than just continuing business as is.
Maybe as a last topic for this conversation, we could talk about maintenance, because when we talk about like getting the days to day right, putting a little more love and attention into the fundamentals, I feel like maintenance should always be part of the conversation, and then sometimes we don't make time for it. So what are some of the easy wins we can do in this time of disruption on the maintenance front? And maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, so there are a few things that plants can do internally, and they're focused on people and processes. And then we can talk about where plants can invest in terms of capital and capex to improve their plant reliability. So when it comes to processes, I believe this is very important time for plants to categorize their assets and equipment based on criticality. What's the demand right now? Which areas, which equipment is in demand? And focus on reliability for that equipment. A lot of plants have many lines and they have equal amount of attention paid to each line. Just like our product portfolio strategy, we need to have a line portfolio strategy, right? And for those lines, we need to have the parts on store. Those critical parts should be available, and if they are sourced externally from abroad, then we should keep the inventory on hand.
So maybe just a little more on that and a couple wrinkles. One is making sure, yes, your efforts are focused on reliability. The other is making sure that your short-term capex, including maintenance capex, is focused on reliability, so that you're continuing that theme of what do I have to do to get the most product out the door with the resources that I've got.
Yeah, and interest rates are still high, and companies don't know how the year is going to shape up. So in terms of capex, there's some capex that's growth related that can wait. There's some capex that's reliability and safety related that should be taken care of. And then there's some additional capex for OE improvement that can be done on an as-need basis. I believe that if the capex is limited, what companies could do is they could look at contract manufacturing on a temporary basis for sub-processes. They could look at leasing equipment instead of buying equipment. They could also look at just having more labor to address the problem until they have a steady state that's accomplished. So these are some of the strategies that they can look at. One more thing that companies could do just to remain agile is to ensure that some of the lines that make a few SKUs could be refurbished, and additional tooling could be added, and then they become flexible to run multiple categories of SKUs. And this is really important for plants for companies that have a lot of plants and the demand is changing regionally, and this will give them flexibility to just shut down the production of this SKU in this plant and move it to this plant as needed, right? So that's the flexibility that plants need as of now.
Including internationally.
Yeah, right. So there are so many great little nuggets in this conversation. I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. Maybe we can wrap up by sort of going down the table, and if you could offer one piece of advice or one bullet point that you hope the audience is taking from this conversation, what would you want to highlight for them? Why don't we start at this end?
Sure. So I think the most important thing is not to either get handcuffed by uncertainty, nor to get yourself lost in long-term overall supply chain optimization and planning that's going to take probably 6 months to a year to figure out and 2 to 3 years to execute, right? So there are things you can do in the current environment, regardless of the uncertainty, that are really no regrets moves. And that's what we've tried to focus on here is, what can I do now that will help me deal with the disruption, regardless of what direction it takes or what the magnitude is.
And reducing waste is a huge part of that in terms of everything you're buying, how do we put it to the best use possible? So looking at your waste critically, not just looking on am I losing more or less than I lost yesterday? And how do we reduce less and less over time, or waste less and less over time?
I'll give two nuggets. One is localizing your supply as best as you can in the short term through your make versus buy decisions, and again, going through contract manufacturers, etc. So essentially, you're looking at localizing and taking out or reducing at least the impact of tariffs.
And what would your second point be?
And the second is to improve your product portfolio and reduce the complexity and any complexity related costs.
I'll focus on the people aspect of manufacturing. I believe these are uncertain times, and it's important for plant management to communicate changing priorities to the workforce, especially the hourly workforce, on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, whatever is appropriate. So having strong daily management systems is very, very critical. And being honest with employees is also very critical. Otherwise, the workforce always feels that there is an agenda behind something. And if you're honest, they will adapt to the changing priorities.
I think those are some great summary points, and I think this whole conversation has been so content rich. So I do want to thank you for your time, and I want to encourage the people who've been listening to this. Some of this is going to work for you, and I can appreciate you may have some questions that you wish I'd asked the group. So maybe I'll wrap up by saying, for people who have been listening to this, want to learn more, ask a few questions, bounce some ideas off the group, what is the best way to get in touch?
The easiest way is to go to AlixPartners.com, and you can look up any of our individual names. You can look up our practice, which is supply chain and operations. Alternatively, find us on LinkedIn is always welcome.
I always think it's so generous when people say, reach out to me on LinkedIn, because I get the pleasure of speaking with you in person. And I hope some people in the audience are saying, I actually have some questions for you, or some questions for you. So please do reach out. In the meantime, thank you again for joining me. This has been absolutely terrific.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint podcast series. Thanks for joining us.